A warm welcome to the World Today. I'm Joke Rogers. Here's what's coming up within the hour. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky raises calls for sea and air truce following Russia's recent targets on energy facilities. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump explains why he revoked legal status for refugees from Ukraine. Plus, bomb on the tracks. France halts Eurostar services in Paris after a World War II bomb was found on one of the tracks. Let's begin the world today from Ukraine, where the President Volodymyr Zelensky has repeated calls for a mutual halt to aerial attacks on critical infrastructure in his country following Russia's recent massive drone and missile attack on Ukraine's energy facilities. The Ukrainian Air Force says Russia launched at least 58 missiles and nearly 200 drones, damaging energy facilities across the country from Kharkiv in the east to Ternopil in the west. The call from Mr. Zelensky to halt aerial bombardments on energy facilities builds on growing rhetoric from Kyiv, Washington, and Moscow on halting the war, now in its fourth year. The Russian Defense Ministry confirmed on Friday it had carried out precision strikes on energy facilities, claiming they support the Ukrainian military. Russian government spokesperson Dmitry Peskov says Russia is targeting facilities linked to Ukraine's military-industrial complex. More on the attack by Russia on Ukraine. At least 18 people, including a child, were wounded in last night's attack. President Zelensky has condemned the strikes, accusing Russia of targeting infrastructure that ensures normal life and hitting residential areas. In response to the attack, French Mirage jets were deployed for the first time, effectively pushing back the assaults. Poland's military also scrambled fighter jets and activated air defense systems during the strike. In the meantime, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has proposed activating an €800 billion defense spending boost for the continent. She proposed activating the National Escape Clause of the Stability and Growth Pact, granting member states the flexibility for immediate defense spending. She elaborated on the Rearm Europe plan to boost the continent's military capabilities, ensuring it's better prepared to face present threats.
Invest in priority areas already defined by the European Defence Agency, reflecting the lessons learned from the war in Ukraine and in full coherence with NATO. Air and missile defense, artillery systems, missiles and ammunition, drones and anti-drone systems, strategic enablers, military mobility, artificial intelligence, cyber and electronic warfare. Second, we have decided to mobilize additional public and private funds for our defense. We will create a new European instrument up to €150 billion to support member states in boosting the defense capabilities that are urgently needed.
Fact is that Europe is facing a clear and present danger. And this is why I presented the Rearm Europe plan today to the leaders. A plan to give Europe the military capability that it needs to face today's threats. It could mobilize up to €800 billion. And it is about taking more responsibility on our shoulders for our own security because the urgency is real. The first is we will propose to activate the National Escape Clause of the Stability and Growth Pact in a controlled, coordinated and time-bound manner. This will allow member states greater fiscal flexibility that they need and give them the space to invest in defence immediately and substantially.
And the UK Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, who said he wants to lead security on the continent, says about 20 countries are interested in joining a coalition of those willing to help Ukraine. all of the countries involved may not all need to send troops to Ukraine, but could provide other types of support. The plan, spearheaded by the UK and France, was set out by Mr. Starmer at this weekend's summit of 18 European and Canadian leaders, and would work to uphold any ceasefire in Russia's war on Ukraine. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said such a move can not be allowed because it would amount to the direct, official and unveiled involvement of NATO members in the war against Russia. It comes as Kyiv attempts to mend relations with Washington after the US president paused the military aid to Ukraine and intelligence sharing in a bid to bring President Zelensky to the negotiating table. Meanwhile, the European Commission President, or rather, the US and Ukraine might have another shot at discussions over bringing peace to Ukraine as high-level US-Ukraine talks are set for Wednesday next week in Riyadh, the Saudi capital. The White House delegation led by National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and Secretary of State Marco Rubio will meet Mr. Zelensky's Chief of Staff, Andriy Yermak. Ahead of the talks, Mr. Zelensky will visit Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, underlying Riyadh's role as a key mediator. The meeting is expected to address the suspension of U.S. military aid and intelligence sharing, as well as the stalled U.S.-Ukraine minerals deal. It will be the first major diplomatic engagement between the two nations since the highly publicized confrontation between President Trump and the President Zelensky in the Oval Office last Friday. I want to bring in international relations analyst Dr. Michael Ogu. He joins us from Nottingham in the United Kingdom. Dr. Ogu, thanks for joining us on the program today. Pleasure having you.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. Good afternoon.
Right. So I'm sure analysts like yourself will be looking forward to the meeting between US and Ukrainian officials in Riyadh next week. This is what Ukraine has always wanted, to be part of any discussion in relation to peace. Do you think leaders will be able to move past the altercation in the Oval Office last Friday?
Well, yeah. So thank you very much for having me. The talks in Saudi Arabia next week, it's a welcome development, following the previous altercation, like you just said, between the two world leaders, or the two leaders basically in the Oval Office, right? Now, it's important for us to understand the actors that are going to be at play, in that meeting next week, right? From what I've seen so far, from what I've read from the media so far, I don't think that the two leaders will be in that meeting. So I think it's going to be basically officials from these two countries, the US particularly, and Ukraine, that will be in that meeting next week, if I'm correct, right? From what I'm gathering, that I don't think will have the level of impact as opposed to what happened, at the Oval Office last week when the two leaders were involved, were present. But of course, we cannot undermine, those kinds of talks. They're very important. They set the tone, they set the background for further talks. All right. Now, it's also important to understand that Russia will not also be at that meeting. I don't think I've seen any correspondence that says Russia is prepared to be at that meeting as well. Which of course is one of the major factors that Ukraine, has put on the table. That Russia, they want to have a sit down with Russia, and negotiate the peace deal. So that is not going to happen. From what I've gathered so far, from indications so far, I don't think that's going to be the case in Saudi Arabia. I think that's just a follow-up meeting from the Oval Office between, U.S. officials and Ukrainian officials. So we can just be hopeful, and hope that that meeting would bring about some kind of way forward for these two countries, because of course the U.S. and Ukraine happen to be at a crossroad now, and they need to move past that this situation going on, to see how the rest of the conflict and the rest of the peace deal, if there's going to be any, would play out eventually. So fingers crossed. Let's just hope for the best, in that meeting next week.
And so while the Ukrainian president has been attending security meetings in Europe, it appears Russia has increased attacks against Ukraine. President Zelensky has been called out before for saying the Russian president does not want peace. Do Russia's actions in recent days corroborate these comments?
Yeah, so I mean, this whole conflict, right from the very start, I have argued, and several other scholars have argued that it's not just about Ukraine. It's not just about Ukraine. It appears that there's a bigger objective. There's a bigger objective, within the European continent, by Russia to assert itself, as perhaps the former USSR, as the superpower in that region. So there seems to be a larger objective at play. All right, and this frequent, incessant, continued attacks by Russia just go to reemphasize and reinforce that belief, that the agenda is bigger than just seizing some parts of Ukraine, and Ukraine joining NATO. Those are just excuses to continue to drag the conflict for as long as possible. So I think that Russia has a bigger agenda, which is of course why the European countries now are beginning to ramp up security as well as defense, in their region. They're beginning to become more and more aware, especially because of the recent move to pull out by the US from the conflict, basically. So it appears that the EU leaders are waking up, which they should have been doing all the while. So thanks to Trump now, they seem to be rising up to the occasion. And of course, we're going to see more of that, in the coming days and months as the conflict prolongs. But I think that Russia has a big agenda, which, we're yet to confirm, right?
And Europe is also shoring up weapons, defense, and all in case they have to take on a more serious approach against Russia. But this seems mainly to protect their own countries and members of the Union who has Ukraine's back at this point.
Yeah, well, I think it serves both purposes, right? I think it serves both purposes. Like I said, it appears that Russia has a big agenda, and of course, countries that are close to Ukraine, like Poland, Finland, and co, are trying to protect themselves. Of course, they're trying to ensure that they are well protected and they are well fortified, in case the conflict spills over to their territory. So I think that is one of the major reasons why they are doing that. And of course, there's also a need to support Ukraine. There's a need for the European countries to rise up and support Ukraine. They cannot pass all the buck to the US, which they have been doing all along. The US has basically, literally been fighting this war with Russia, because they have been the ones funding and financing and supporting Ukraine, in every way possible. Of course, there has been some help from Europe and Britain, France, and all of this, but it has not been substantial. So I think that it is now time for them to rally behind Ukraine, and see this conflict to a logical conclusion, right? I think it's high time.
Well, I've also read and heard about President Volodymyr Zelensky's argument that he can conduct elections during wartime. What do you make of that? Can that really happen? Is this something that he should be thinking about at this time?
Yeah. So I mean, it depends on the volatility of of the Ukrainian state at the moment, and of course from images and the videos that we see and the media reports. I'm not sure that Ukraine is in a position to hold elections, that are going to be free, fair, and credible and representative of the Ukrainians. So I think it is fair enough, to say that it might not be logistically, sound and possible and feasible, to hold credible elections in Ukraine, considering all that is going on. And of course, the continued attacks from Russia. I don't think that would, I'm not sure how that will play out. But from all indication, it would not. I don't think it would be a very smooth, exercise, logistic wise. So I think it's fair, for the Ukrainian president to say that it's going to be difficult for elections to go on now, even though of course there has to also be talks about, what is the way forward, right? If elections are not holding now, then, when are they likely to hold? What is the alternative, basically? I think that should be what we should be hearing from Zelensky, as opposed to, conducting elections in the heat of the conflict that is ongoing.
Dr. Ogo, thanks again.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, thank you.
Continuing from there, as Ukrainian officials begin preparation for their next meeting in Riyadh next week, the U.S. government does not want them coming with the hopes an apology letter could nudge the government to lift restrictions on military aid. State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce says expecting a change will be going too far.
If you have a conversation with someone, it's not a negotiation, it's not irreconcilable. It is the conveyance of the American position in a different way. Nothing was different. Nothing was conveyed differently. There was no change of position. It was the conveyance of the existing American position about Hamas and how it cannot exist in Gaza. Well, that's a road a bit too far. We will not discuss issues of intelligence or diplomatic agreements or the sharing of information. That I will not discuss. But from the start, after the Friday situation with President Zelensky, and Secretary Rubio was in the room, it was a surprise that his behavior took a turn, and in the Oval Office. And it was clear, as the president had stated publicly, that he was not ready for peace, that there was one thing that he should not do, and that was
Meanwhile, Mr. Trump's special envoy for Ukraine and Russia, Keith Kellogg, has blamed the Ukrainian president for the U.S. decision to cut aid and intelligence to Kyiv, saying the Ukrainians brought it on themselves. Mr. Kellogg was speaking at an event at the Council on Foreign Relations in New York on Thursday. According to him, the human cost of the Russia-Ukraine war, the need to reset relations with Russia to secure America's vital national interest, and ultimately to stop U.S. entanglement in an endless proxy war are the driving reasons why President Trump's approach on the framing of this war is distinct from the broader conventional approach to the war.
The continued isolation and lack of engagement with the Russians as the war in Ukraine continued is no longer a viable or a sustainable strategy, and is certainly not a responsible approach diplomatically for the United States to continue. These reasons, the human cost of this war, the need to reset relations with Russia to secure Americans' vital national interest, and ultimately to stop U.S. entanglement in an endless proxy war, are the driving reasons why President Trump's approach and the framing of this war is distinct from the broader conventional approach that we see publicly to the war. The critical minerals deal is an important part of this effort to get Ukraine to the table. And President Trump approaches diplomacy and engagements in a very transactional manner, with economics as the foundation and driving force behind international affairs in President Trump's America's first, quote, transactional diplomacy, end quote, model. The transactional diplomacy approach is why in his discussions with foreign leaders is the first question them is often to ask, as I found the very first time we were in the cabinet room when a foreign official came in, the comment was, quote, what is the trade imbalance between our two nations? That is the same underpinning of the proposed critical minerals deal between the United States and Ukraine. It sets a foundation in which the United States can receive a direct return on its investment in Ukraine. The United States has been Ukraine's leading partner in supporting Ukraine's defensive war from Russia to the extent of over $170 billion. This deal, the critical minerals deal, in one sense, is a mechanism in which the American taxpayer can begin to be recuperated from the costly financial sustainment of this war.
And still ahead. Mexico's president praises the suspension of trade tariffs imposed by the United States. Please stay with us for details. Welcome back. There are more developments in the U.S.-Ukraine relations, with President Donald Trump announcing that he would soon decide whether or not to revoke temporary legal status for some 240,000 Ukrainians who fled the conflict with Russia, following a Reuters report that his administration planned to take that step. Such a move will be a stunning reversal of the welcome Ukrainians received under President Joe Biden's administration, and potentially put them on a fast track to deportation.
Well, France is also willing to put soldiers into Ukraine for safety reasons if we can get it. I will say that we've made a lot of progress with Ukraine and a lot of progress with Russia over the last couple of days. And it'd be great to bring that to an end so we don't have to talk that way about nuclear. It'd be great if everybody would get rid of their nuclear weapons. You know, we have Russia and us have by far the most. China will have an equal amount within 4 or 5 years. And it would be great if we could all denuclearize, because the power of nuclear weapons is crazy. It is crazy. And, you know, I was very far along a process with Russia, despite the Russia hoax, which didn't make it easy. It was a total hoax, a total rigged hoax by some bad people. But despite that, I was very close to having a program with Russia, denuclearization, and we're going to get China. I spoke to President Xi about it, and he would have been very happy to have gone along with it. But bad things happened, like an election that was rigged happened, and so we had to come back 4 years later. But I would very much like to start those talks. The opposite of what you say, the denuclearization would be incredible.
Not quite done, but the U.S. president, we heard him lashing out at NATO members, threatening to withdraw support if they do not pay their fair share of security dues to NATO.
I view NATO as potentially good, but you gotta get some good thinking in NATO. It's very unfair what's been happening. Until I came along, we were paying close to 100% of NATO. So think of it, we're paying 100% of their military, and they're screwing us on trade. Well, I think what's going to happen is Ukraine wants to make a deal because I don't think they have a choice. I also think that Russia wants to make a deal because in a certain different way that only I know, they have no choice either. I made a deal with Saudi Arabia where, because normally you'd go to UK first, and last time I went to Saudi Arabia, they put up $450 billion. You know that, right? You were there. We had American companies that took in $450 billion. I said, well, this time they've gotten richer. We've all gotten older. So I said, I'll go if you pay $1 trillion, $1 trillion to American companies, meaning the purchase over a 4-year period of $1 trillion. And they've agreed to do that. So I'm going to be going there, and I have a great relationship with them, and they've been very nice, but they're going to be spending a lot of money to American companies for buying military equipment. I view NATO as potentially good, but you got to get some good thinking in NATO. It's very unfair what's been happening. Until I came along, we were paying close to 100% of NATO. So think of it, we're paying 100% of their military, and they're screwing us on trade.
And returning to the proposed discussions between the U.S. and Ukraine regarding peace in Ukraine, Polish President Andrzej Duda has urged Mr. Zelensky to return to the negotiating table. Let's bring in research consultant Osarume Izeboku. He joins us from Germany in Europe. Thank you for joining us on the program today.
Thank you for having me.
Right, so I want to begin with whether you think the U.S. president's impressions of NATO have changed since the last time he was president.
Well, I think it hasn't changed as much. If for anything, he has been more agitated, owing to the Ukraine-Russian war, and then he's found more reasons to be agitated. he's found more reasons to want to make certain claims about the efficacy, the importance, the significance of the NATO organization as it contributes to the U.S. safety. And considering the fact that the United States is still way more, it pays more, it spends more for the corporate, safety of both Europe and America. So you see him not really comfortable about the situation, and he's more agitated as we see it today.
And Mr. Trump withdrawing U.S. support will be huge for Europe and probably create a vacuum they cannot fill. Is NATO and the EU combined able to withstand Russia's covert expansion plans on the continent?
Well, I believe that Europe have got their plans and they're stepping up, to the events as we have them today. They understand the fact that if they don't act, they are going to be at the receiving end of continental catastrophe. So Europe is stepping up and ensuring that safety is now on the front burner of anything that they are doing right now. So for me, I would say, first and foremost, Europe is stepping forward to own their responsibility. But secondly, to answer your question, I would say that it will be an uphill task, so to say. Not knowing what they are going to come out with, it will be an uphill task for Europe to feel, the shoes of the United States in whatever capacity. The more, the merrier.
Right, and the comment from the Pentagon and State Department about whether or not an apology letter from the Ukrainian leader could help bring relations between the U.S. and Ukraine back to friendly waters. But do you think the Pentagon is right that it could take more groveling on the part of the Ukrainian president to appease Donald Trump?
Well, this is where I go historical. When you view the personality of Donald Trump, you will discover that first and foremost, he's a wonderful gambler. When you look at his historical, when it comes to business, historical proclivities, you would discover that even with his own personal businesses, he has gambled, and he gambled well. He got the results that he wanted. So we see him as a successful gambler, we see him as a successful businessman, and then we see him bringing that skill, into the White House. And of course, you shouldn't expect anything other than that. But if it goes sideways, it's going to be something that he has to answer for.
And media around the world, has been accused of not featuring the other parts of the meeting at the Oval Office, saying the shorter clips do not show the magnanimity of the U.S. hosts to their Ukrainian guests before the altercation. Do you think that knowing that could change the narrative that is already out there?
The narratives that what?
The narratives, that's already out there that, that the U.S. government was unfair to the Ukrainian government, and which led to the altercation. The other part of the meeting, that they were actually more amicable to Zelensky and his team.
Well, I would simply say, for me, I think that the United States, being the #1 spender, on this Ukrainian-Russian thing, has every right to want to make claims to asking for more appreciation, owing to the fact that, like Donald Trump had said, they're not expecting anything back. The Biden administration and previous administrations had gone into this war spending and not expecting anything back from them. And so for Trump, as a businessman, as a business gambler, as one who has been successful in his own business, comes on board and decides, well, this is how I'm going to run this thing. I'm not going to be humanitarian anymore. I'm simply going to go the way that puts America first. Now, when you understand him from that perspective, you then cut him the slack. You understand that he's just trying to protect the financial realities, of his country. But then, what happened in the Oval Office? Oh Lord, what happened in the Oval Office took me by surprise. He is unpredictably unpredictable. I found it simply out of the books. It has never happened before. I sat down here watching Zelensky literally stammering. You could see it all over him that he was going through serious body stress. He was going through serious emotional stress. And you saw Vance coming at him, and you saw the reporter who had asked the question about what he was wearing. If this was right, why is he not wearing a suit? I saw it actually as an attempt, to remove the emotional, war that Zelensky had come with to first of all remove the walls, the defenses, and then go at him. Well, it was a strategy that worked. And then it worked. Now Zelensky is being asked, to apologize, which he has done. But then I also know that this period of time is going to be used to consolidate on the business strategy of negotiation. I believe the Trump team is going to use this period to make the Ukraine understand that they need the United States more than the United States needs the rare resources or whatever in Ukraine.
Right, research consultant Osarume Ozebokun. A pleasure having you again on the program today.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, European leaders met for an emergency summit in Brussels with the aim of ramping up defense spending and, of course, shoring up support for Ukraine. Among those attending was Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. The meeting comes at a pivotal moment for Europe as the United States upends its close alliance with the continent and pauses all support for Ukraine. Lars Holter is with Deutsche Welle and joins me from Berlin. Well, Lars, what's the outcome of the EU meeting in Brussels?
Thanks for having me. Well, it was a long meeting, but a successful one, and it came at a difficult time, days only after President Donald Trump in the US had made it quite clear that to the world that he has no interest and that he can't be relied on to support Ukraine in its defense against the Russian aggressor. In fact, as we know, Trump sees Ukraine as an aggressor and has pretty much told Europeans that it is their job to defend the country and to protect Europe itself against possible future aggressions by Vladimir Putin. And so it was clear that EU members had to invest heavily, and they did. They agreed for now on borrowing up to 150 billion euros jointly to lend to EU governments to spend on their militaries. And they showed clear solidarity with Ukraine, with EU Council President Antonio Costa saying, "We are on your side," to Ukraine's President Zelensky, who was present at the meeting in Brussels. Also, France suggested a European defense shield. Nuclear weapons, of course, are playing a role there. The likely new German Chancellor Merz agrees with that plan, and he has had talks with French President Macron and with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Now, his country is not in the EU anymore, of course, but it is the other European nuclear power. For now, there's still lots of details to be hashed out. Final decisions will have to be made in 2 weeks at the regularly scheduled EU summit.
Well, Germany is also on the way to shoring up defense. What can you tell us about the latest developments there?
Yes, indeed. As you might remember, we just had those elections about 2 weeks ago, and the Christian Democrats Party that won the election is currently in the process of building a coalition to form a government. And they are talking to the Social Democrats, that is the party of still Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Now, those parties have apparently seen the need to ramp up defense spending, and they want to take it out of the debt brake mechanism that many have said over the years had held back Germany. Now, here's the thing. The debt brake is a principle enshrined in the German constitution that says that no new debt can be accrued, so that all money spent will have to come out of the available budget. Now, according to the plan, the likely future coalition has hatched out 1% of Germany's GDP will still go into defense, so it's coming out of the budget. But everything beyond that will be financed by new debt, and it will be a lot. The current Secretary of Defense says the German military needs about 85 billion euros per year. And given those latest developments with the US support for NATO and Ukraine weakening, it could very well be 130 billion or more. So no longer than NATO's famous 2%, but more likely up to 3% of the country's gross domestic product. And that, of course, is a lot. But the likely future Chancellor Merz has specifically said that he wants to do whatever it takes, showing a very strong commitment there.
But defense spending is not the only expense Berlin tries to agree on. What else is on the docket here?
That's right. Besides granting more money for the military, that new coalition plans on taking up 500 billion euros in new debt to invest in Germany's infrastructure, Germany's crumbling infrastructure, I should say, and that is definitely necessary. Germany needs massive investment everywhere, starting with digitalization, the energy grid, but all the way really down to roads and rails. Bridges have become a major concern. There are at least 4,000 highway bridges in Germany that are in dire need of repair. Some are saying it might be 8,000. There are many similar issues other than bridges, of course. Now, fixing all this is expensive, but the government thinks this is a good investment. And I will tell you, it is indeed. Economists have said for a long time that investing heavily in infrastructure is the best way to pull Germany out of its ongoing recession. We have been in recession here for 2 years. The economy is still at least stagnating, and infrastructure investment would guarantee lots of jobs in construction and elsewhere, but also make the country more competitive in so many ways. So here in Berlin, they're rushing to get this massive deal through and to get to work as fast as possible.
Lars, thanks again. U.S. President Donald Trump has signed orders significantly expanding the goods exempted from his new tariffs on Canada and Mexico that were imposed this week. It's the second time in 2 days that Mr. Trump has rolled back his taxes on imports from the U.S. two biggest trade partners, measures that have raised uncertainty for businesses and worried financial markets. On Wednesday, he said he would temporarily spare car makers from 25% import levies just a day after they came into effect. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said on Thursday morning he had a colorful conversation about tariffs in a phone call with Mr. Trump. Mr. Trudeau told reporters that a trade war between the two allies was likely for the foreseeable future, despite some target relief. Meanwhile, the Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has thanked the U.S. President for the move, while Canada's finance minister said the country would in turn hold off on its threatened second round of retaliatory tariffs on U.S. products. She said she had an excellent and respectful call with Mr. Trump, adding that the two countries would work together to stem the flow of opioid fentanyl from Mexico into the U.S. and curb the trafficking of guns going the other way. The carve-out from the duties applies to goods shipped under North America's Free Trade Pact, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, which Mr. Trump signed during his first term. Items that currently come into the U.S. under the Pact's rules include televisions, air conditioners, avocados, and beef, according to analysts by the firm Trade Partnership Worldwide. The measures also reduce tariffs on potash, a key ingredient for fertilizer needed by U.S. farmers from 25% to 10%. And still ahead on the program. Welcome back as we take a look at what's happening elsewhere in the world. Security forces of Syria's new rulers have engaged in heavy fighting with fighters loyal to the deposed President Bashar al-Assad in a coastal area of the country. It's the worst violence in Syria since rebels toppled Mr. Assad in December and installed an Islamist transitional government. A war monitoring group, the British-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, said more than 70 people have been killed so far. A curfew has been imposed in the cities of Latakia and Tartus, where the fighting broke out. And the UN's Deputy Humanitarian Coordinator in the Palestinian territory, Sam Rose, says days since Israel closed Gaza's borders have created a crucial need to have humanitarian aid into the region. The closure of the border crossings is exacerbating the already dire living conditions of Gaza residents during Ramadan and obstructing the entry of humanitarian aid. The prices of essential goods and commodities in the Strip have soared. He warns that more devastating consequences await the population in Gaza if the borders are not opened.
It's been 5 days now that the borders of Gaza have been closed and entry of humanitarian aid has been blocked from coming in to Gaza. It's critical that this aid be restored. It's provided much needed respite for the population that have gone through so much over the past 16 months due to the blockade and the misery that they've faced. Palestinian families that should be celebrating the holy month of Ramadan are yet again facing uncertainty and fear as supplies on the market become diminished and key humanitarian services such as food assistance, bakeries, healthcare, water and sanitation are again at risk. It's critical that these borders reopen. Humanitarian aid cannot be negotiable as per international humanitarian law. It's critical that the ceasefire is extended and that hostages released and the population and families here can get back to rebuilding their lives.
Meanwhile, the 5 European members of the UN Security Council have called on Israel to let humanitarian aid flow into the Gaza Strip. Speaking on their behalf, France's ambassador to the UN, J. Damakadiri, said Israel needs to abide by its own obligations under international law and to allow and facilitate the safe and unconditional delivery of aid.
We call on Israel to abide by its obligations under international law and to allow and facilitate the safe, unconditional, massive and unhindered delivery of humanitarian aid at scale, as well as to ensure the protection of civilians and other protected persons, including humanitarian workers, in line with international humanitarian law. All relevant Security Council resolutions must be implemented, including Resolution 2720 and 2735. Second, we call on parties to find a way forward to the next phases of the ceasefire agreement and hostage release deal, and we commend the efforts of Egypt, Qatar, and the United States to facilitate the talks. We express our condemnation of Hamas' ongoing retention and cruel treatment of the hostages, and we reiterate a call for their release. We need a permanent ceasefire that can pave the way for the release of all remaining hostages and for the reconstruction of Gaza. We reiterate our strong condemnation of terrorism. The delivery of humanitarian aid to civilians in need is non-negotiable in accordance with international humanitarian law. Third, we welcome regional efforts to cohere around a single plan for the next phase in Gaza, and we stand ready to support and develop these ideas further.
And this happened this morning. Trains to and from Paris cancelled, an area evacuated, and part of the main ring road temporarily closed after an unexploded World War II bomb was found on tracks leading to a station. Eurostar services at Gare du Nord were scrapped for the day after the 500-kilogram bomb was found on tracks in the Paris suburb of Saint-Denis during overnight work. Homes with windows in a 500-meter radius of the bomb were evacuated, and part of the Paris circular peripherique was shut as the clearance operation took place. French Transport Minister Philippe Tabarot said local rail services at the Gare du Nord would not resume until late afternoon at the earliest. The bomb was discovered 200 meters away from the busy Paris peripherique, about 2.5 kilometers north of Gare du Nord, Europe's busiest train station. Eurostar services were running normally between Brussels and Man-la-Vallée to the east of Paris, as well as trains between London and Brussels and London and Amsterdam. Well, ahead of International Women's Day, a new report launched by UNICEF, Plan International, and UN Women reviews how adolescent girls' lives have changed in the last 30 years since the Beijing Platform for Action was endorsed by 189 governments in 1995. The report says women's and girls' rights are facing unprecedented growing threats worldwide, from higher levels of discrimination to weaker legal protections and less fundings from programmings and institutions that support and protect women. The report is called Women's Rights in Review, 30 years after Beijing, published ahead of the UN's 50th International Women's Day on March 8. It also shows that in 2024, nearly a quarter of governments worldwide reported a backlash on women's rights.
Good news story is that the world today is actually more equal for women and girls than ever before. And that tells us that progress is in fact possible. And yet the report will also show, with its data and evidence, that this progress has been too slow, too fragile, too uneven, and most importantly, that this progress is not guaranteed. The world is, in fact, experiencing a growing backlash against gender equality and women's rights. Anti-rights actors who are increasingly well-funded and coordinated are actively undermining long-standing consensus on key women's rights issues. And where they cannot roll back legal or policy gains altogether, they seek to either block or slow down their implementation. And so right now, a girl who was born today will wait until she is nearly 40 years old, until she sees equality in parliaments everywhere, parity in parliaments. She will be 68 years old until child early and forced marriage is ended around the world. And she will not even live to see the day by which extreme poverty, which has a female face, is eradicated from this earth. She'll be 137 years old by the time the feminization of poverty ends.
Over the past 30 years, important steps have been taken to achieve the vision of the Beijing Platform for Action. The proportion of women in parliament has doubled. Maternal mortality has declined by a third. Girls have achieved parity with boys in upper secondary school, which is crucial for them to thrive. There have been over 1,500 legal reforms in 189 countries to level the playing fields for women and girls. We also see that there is much, much further to go. We have more women in parliament than ever before, but still, 3/4 of parliamentarians are men. This means that laws and policies that don't reflect women's lives. Moreover, those women who do put themselves forward for political office often face unprecedented levels of violence and harassment, turbocharged by the misuse of digital technology. Maternal mortality is down, but still, millions of women die needlessly in pregnancy and childbirth. And the truth is, progress on this most preventable of problems has largely stalled since 2015.
And finally, well, you don't get to see this every day. Police from the Saratoga. What a relief indeed, and icier not. I could literally tell that those rescuers were sweating it out on that icy pond. Well, that's our show today and for the week. Thank you for watching. I'm Joka Rogers.